Hey everybody, welcome to our Q&A. So if you're new here, welcome to TKD Coach Academy, Richie Forde, along with Adrian Byrne. So the purpose of today's session, usually on a Tuesday, we would have an actual session, a bit of a training session, or maybe go through some techniques, a bit practical, like a webinar style or whatever. But we had a little bit of a mini milestone over the weekend, and we came up with the idea of maybe giving it back to you guys a little bit. So we 31,000 followers on Instagram, and usually we had a little bit of a tradition going back that every kind of like bit of a milestone isn't really much of a round number or a milestone for that matter. But look, it's the next few to get your questions in. We have plenty of questions lined up already that people have sent us in. So if you want to get involved, make sure and get into the chat box. Also, make sure and like this video, hit the thumbs up on the video, share it to people on your social media, and we'll get stuck to it. So we have a couple of questions lined up, and we'll start with those, and then we'll start to, as you guys feed some questions in, and maybe some of the things we speak about might provoke some thoughts of your own that you can add in the comment box to the chat box as well. So, do you want to start with our first one, Adrian?
Yeah, so we'll have a look. We'll have all the questions here sitting at the bottom screen. So this one is, how do we utilize feints and fakes? And we had that little bit of a chat before we got started with this was, well, what do you see the difference between a feint and a fake as, and what do I see it as? So, I mean, for me, it was just the order of magnitude, as in what was moving in order to create the kind of the impression of movement. And you had, I think, some ideas on that one yourself.
Yeah, well, of course they can be used interchangeably, but when you're thinking of this, I would consider like a fake almost like more of a technique. So like I would use like a fake as in this type of a fake, where a feint to me is kind of like more of a body kind of a reaction or just a little adjustment of the upper body or something like that. Of course, they're very, very practical to use, and they're very used at the very, very high level. If anybody followed the UFC, not last weekend, but the weekend before, Israel Adesanya, a fantastic striker, used them really well, and he had Jan Blachowicz maybe jumping on every single feint that he did. So if you can use it, it's very, very effective. But one of the things that I want to kind of talk about is how do we utilize feints and fakes is it has to be of some sort of practical use at the end. So when you do it, it must be for a reason. You don't just do it for the sake of it. Are you trying to push somebody back towards the edge? Are you trying to get a reaction to set something else up? Yeah. So usually you're thinking of maybe like a step ahead. And that's where the ultimate high level of striking comes in as well, which obviously is very much relevant for us in ITF. So when we look at some feints and things like that, we're like some things that you can also incorporate that is very, very easy to use is your front hand position. Something so simple, and you wouldn't really consider it as a feint, but where you carry your front hand, it gives it a lot of deception. So having it here versus here and here, it's a different way people perceive the distance between you and the opponent. So that's like, it's not a feint per se, but it can be used. So just like an adjustment of the hand here, it can just take a spark of attention away from people for a second. So that's the use of your front hand and almost kind of like you can paw at it as like a distance measure and things like that as well. Not a feint, as I said, per se, but it can be very, very useful. Okay, you can also have like feints linking them in with your shots. So you can have like feints into opposite shots and things like that. You can have reactions, so just testing and going, or you can do here. One of the most important ones that we've talked about so many times, your footwork. So like one of the very common ones that we have is the test step. It's essentially a feint or a fake. So we're here just setting a rhythm, push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, push, pull. And just that adjustment of rhythm is very important, and it's almost like a fake. It tests them. Do they react? If they don't react, you're in. If they do react, you can come back out. So I think like feints and things like that are very much connected to the rhythm and the timing as well.
Yeah, perfect. So let's have a look. We had really tonight quite a range of questions. So it's going to be, some of them would be digging into a little bit deeper than others, but let's see where we're at. So very good. So greetings from Argentina, and very welcome if you're coming from Argentina. So this one came in from Brendan Dennehy, who's talking about developing efficient technique for special technique competition. And so there's a few things that kind of want to jump into right away when we start talking about special technique. And the first one I'll jump over here. The first one is that, yeah, we've covered plyometrics, and plyometrics is kind of your start position. The second thing we have to talk about when you're getting into special technique is, do you have the build for it? Because everybody can improve their special technique, but you're not going to hit the heights that are required for European and World Championships if you don't have at least most of the morphology. And that means, are you tall enough? Are your legs long enough? Is your body weight appropriate so that you have really good rate of force development and the power to weight ratio is good? And if you have those things in your favor, you work on developing your strength, you work on developing the explosiveness, particularly through the legs, then we get into technique. So the few key things in technique as far as ITF Taekwondo special technique that go across all 5 of the male techniques or the 3 of the female techniques are: first principle, you need to be executing the technique at the absolute apex of the jump, which means, particularly in the ones where we have to switch, the turning kick and the front kick, we need to be initiating that switch on the way up so that the foot reaches its maximum height as I reach my maximum height. So the first thing we want to think about is cycle time. How fast can you cycle those legs over to get to the target? The second thing is within the whole coordination sphere, I suppose, is, for example, if I want to do reverse turning kick and I'm standing on the ground, there's no coordination to getting it there. But in adding the jump and making sure that the foot is extended at the end of it, there's a certain amount of coordination to make sure that we get there at the very top of the jump. And then I want you to kind of look at the couple of styles that are available to you. So let's take the 2 examples I picked being completely different for an Opi Apchagi, Katerina Kozlechkova, Russia, I don't know how many times world champion and World Cup champion in special technique, and Sean Neary from New Zealand, who's not a super tall guy, or Marcel Miron from Romania, again, not super tall. They're tall guys, but not super tall. But they have a phenomenal ability to manipulate their body in space to make sure that the parts that are important are facing the top. So this I can show you as easily while jumping as while almost sitting down. So I'll move back here a little bit. So if I'm doing, let's take the high front kick as an example. My leg is under me. I could be trying to stay tall and kick above my head this way. So I bring my leg up. I want to kick above my head. And so this gets quite difficult. But if you're very flexible and your jump is quite vertical, so there's not a long distance carried, this can be effective enough. And the Katerina Kozlechkova will kick that way to some degree. But you could also be in this position, okay, which you'll see with Sean Neary and others, to where the body is laying back. And so the recovery after that kick, okay, you'll see the kick comes up and the recovery is going to be coming back facing down towards the floor, because you have to finish your kick, boom, and come back down this way, which is difficult, very, very challenging. So you have to pick a technique to suit yourself. To give you one more example, just while we're talking about the special technique and picking the technique to suit yourself, let's say, and I'll keep this low, we're kicking Bob to the face with a turning kick. So depending on how my hips work and the degree of internal rotation in my hip, I might go straight forward and have my kick this way towards Bob. For me, that would never be my choice. It's kind of a tricky one. I could choose to attack at an angle, and that lets me roll my hip to the side a little bit. And then it's easy for me to go through Bob that way. However, we've also had people who have even more limited flexibility but good jumping power, and they're going to come from the other side, which is a very, very strange thing to do. So they're actually going to be passing across the target this way as they go, which seems very strange. It's not the most mechanically efficient, but we have to work around our body. For the flying side kick, maybe some people will talk classically with a foot here. And my own student, Louise McCaa, does a hurdle step. So she's coming forward and the back foot comes over this way, which is, again, a little bit unusual. But if you watch the videos, particularly where we show hers in slow motion, and we put that on our Instagram and our YouTube shorts, you can see it's effective. But the real challenge, and particularly for Brendan, is find the technique that suits you, your body type, and your flexibility, and you'll enjoy a lot more success. But build it on those foundations of your special technique, plyometrics, your basic jumping exercises, your power development, and you'll go a lot further and achieve a lot more success. So
Yeah, it was. We spoke about as well, Adrian, in the ITF coaching conference about was it the flop they did in the Olympics? What was that
That's right,
jump called
Crosby
again?
flop.
Yeah. So again, it's the same thing about finding that for your body, how can you best manipulate the jump? So it's kind of almost just kind of experimenting with that, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, look at the top people and look at the amount of variety in the styles that they choose, and it has to suit their body type. There isn't one way to make that jump effective, but there are rules that apply. You're still working within the realm of physics, but there is some accommodation to allow for individual difference there as well.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one as well. So this comes up in a lot of different ways, and we each had ideas on it. So tips on isolating pattern movement. So this is a bigger question, and it was looking really at focusing on the challenging parts out of patterns and how you might improve those. So some examples that were given were the 360 jump in Chungmu, the low stance pressing block in Jungun, which when you're learning them, they're difficult, like they're challenging. The bending ready stance to side piercing kick and the rhythm out of that into the next movement and things like that. So Richie, do you want to lead off on one or two of your ideas and I'll follow you along?
Yeah, absolutely. So on this, basically, what are you doing? You're just trying to pull away the bits that are challenging to you in the pattern. And one of the purposes of this is what I want to really get across for people here is if you're looking at something and you're taking it away. So for example, if we use maybe the first three movements of one, so you're going 1, 2, and 3. Now having these in isolation is going to be something that you need to pull back in. So that was something that always, when I was practicing patterns this way, sometimes then you can see that you're practicing it the correct way, but in the full pattern, you almost kind of go like autopilot again. So it's very important to be able to, if you're taking something from the whole package, we say, and then putting it in isolation, that you always put it back in the way you've been practicing. And that's so important. And what we spoke about as well a lot of times is it's repetition with this stuff, isn't it? It's creating the correct repetition, and it's trying to get that fluidity between the movements.
Yeah, and I want to steal a few ideas there or jump onto a few things because, like for me, you look at the way the grades are progressed in Taekwondo, and there is a certain logic to it, and there's a certain kind of absence of logic to it as well. So we have families of movements that would be easier to learn together. So, for example, if we take the 360 jump in Chungmu, for example, so we want to be here and jump and land into our knife hand guarding block. Well, that's the first jumping hand technique other than, say, the likes of the X stance that we encounter. So it's quite a challenge when it turns up. But what if you practice the family of techniques? So maybe we do things like mid-air strikes or dodging strikes or 180 mid-air or even 180 jumps that are landing, with a basic technique. So the challenge is if you haven't done any progression towards that, then they're difficult. But there's other things we can do. So we can practice the movements like that in their family of movements. So like downward blocks together or pressing blocks together, upward blocks together, rising blocks together, things like that, and all their varieties, just to reinforce the principles and the way of moving the body, because then they tie together and they make sense. But we can also simplify. So we could be practicing a pressing block in front of a mirror, just getting the rotation and movement of the hands to kind of help us with that. Do things in slow motion that are normally slow, or even in normal motion that would say we first encounter in slow motion. That will help. We can also exaggerate the movements. So, we can change the stance or make it a little bit harder even, just to make it so that when it comes back to doing the basic movement, it actually feels simpler. So something along the lines of, let's say, parallel stance punch. But if we repeat on the same side over and over again, we learn it with a slightly different rhythm. Yeah, if we step forwards, but then I also have a step into the punch, it just helps us to kind of find the relaxation, find the moment of extension, and time that finish. As a very, very simple thing that we can do as well is we have basic patterns. We can put some of these more complicated things, for example, into a more basic pattern. So let's say, for example, we take Sajumaki and we do, or Sajidrugi, and we replace the punch with the palm pressing. So we could have and so on. And we do this in Sajutogi with the, directional thrusts, and Sajuchagi with directional kicks sometimes. So I know they're very fond of those in Norway. So yeah, we can do that with new movements. So we add in some of the turns, some of the changes of direction, but with a familiar footwork pattern, so that we're only concentrating on the hand movement maybe. So there's a lot of ways with some creativity to disguise an awful lot more repetition, which I think is, for all of us, the goal.
I think that's it. The creativity of it is just to spice things up, because patterns can be quite repetitive. It's more of it's a bit more straightforward than a dynamic system like sparring. So things are a bit more repetitive, and it's just getting that creative way. And one of the examples in this question was actually the bending ready stance. And like think of how you can use constraints and have objects there. So maybe you have something on the floor that you have to, maybe somebody's trying to go to spot that drop. And one of the most important things on the bending ready stance in particular is to set up a good position, is to have your foot position nailed from the beginning. If you can have your toes pointing down, as you rotate here, this kick will naturally start to go with the attacking toes up. And that's not something that we want. So having things correct in the first place, having your knee at that 45 degrees, as you rotate, in a perfect position for a good side kick. And that's very, very important. So if you can have these creative ways to constrain the techniques as well, it's so important. So you have an object there, maybe there's you have to kick above a chair, something like that, something that's in the way that gets you to go through the technique, something that gets you to drop, maybe there's a line that you have to meet, and getting that action reaction of the knee coming up and the body weight dropping. So it's just getting creative, as Adrian said, to come up with those ideas.
Yeah, and the next question is very much linked to the patterns in that way as well, and kind of talking about how to work for fluidity and speed. And there's a couple of different ways we could look at that. So the technical committee are pushing us a little bit towards improving the rhythm between the movements, so smaller gaps between the finished movements, so the pattern has a little bit more continuity and flow. And if you're not used to it, it's really quite challenging. But even if we look at, as a general principle, improving the fluidity and the rhythmic sections of some patterns, I really think isolating the rhythmic elements of the pattern and then putting them, working them until they feel okay, and then putting them back into the whole pattern. So like a whole approach is really important there. And as an example, just maybe something like, we'll take our example from Chungmu, where and we want to have that slightly more complicated rhythm. Practice it left and right, do that mirrored as well, and see how you find it. Because what you have to do is create the jump, land, and go in a normal rhythm into the upset fingertip thrust, and then in a faster rhythm as you do the pulling of the front foot into the side back strike, and then forward in normal rhythm. So you have the jump, you have a normal rhythm, a faster rhythm, back to a normal rhythm. And this kind of thing occurs a lot, around continuous motions, connecting motions, fast motions. And the return is often the problem. So people do something in fast motion or stamping motion, and then they hurry afterwards. So a lot of just practicing the transitions between the different rhythms, I think, is a great way to improve the fluidity. This is a challenging one. So how do you train the reverse jumping kicks for Ulji and Yong? So
yeah, they're tricky ones. Like for me, on the jump back kicks, I think that you kind of try to elevate the knee as high as possible. So like, the more you can elevate, the longer time you have in the air to execute a technique.
Yeah.
So that's something that I really try to do. So as you get the jump back kick, you try to not kind of almost jump with straight legs. So just try to pull it up and separate the knees a little bit from the kick, and it just gives a nice visual as well of a little bit of contrast. So on these kicks in particular, if you try to go directly up, it's not the same. So a little bit of a touch forward, I think, really helps with that. It just brings my body weight a little bit central. If I'm trying to jump from my stance directly, so if I can just come in and my body weight is now a little bit straighter, I can come up with that kick much easier. And then I can get the back kick off much nicer. I think knees for me is a massive thing. A lot of time, if you can get the knees higher, it just gives you that extra little bit of time in the air, and then you're just looking to extend the kick. Of course, practice it with the jump. break it down. If you can get the kick correctly from here with a back kick, I think it was there, but you get the idea, and then you can build it up from there.
Yeah, and stealing that concept, like I think one of the things that you can do is like, okay, so we want to finish the kick at the apex of the jump, which means we have to be executing the kick on the way up. And the challenge in Yong and Ulji is that you're kicking forwards as well. So you're trying to carry your weight forward as you go, which is a little bit more difficult than kicking on the spot or maybe moving slightly backwards as you jump with. So the rotation will want to pull me backwards. So I have to attack the kick a little bit more. And that leads us to over rotation and some of the issues with that. But one of the things we can try to do is, yes, kick and finish on the way up and then land, but look to find that extension. So again, if we're kicking poor Bob here, that I'm looking to finish my extension on the way up so that then I can balance and recover.
Pull the legs apart.
Yeah, and then let's see about attacking, like really attacking both the jump and the kick. So in doing that, it gives us the speed we need to get there. Usually being a little bit timid around the kick causes a lot of trouble with this one, because even with or without a target, if you're turning too slowly, if we're not attacking that kick, we're not going to have enough time in the jump, and we're going to end up kicking slightly on the way down or overshooting the turn. And once we overshoot the turn, we're fighting for balance, and it's really, really hard. So
yeah, definitely. That execution there, even in your own kick, Adrian, it's nice when you see that. It's just the legs kind of traveling apart a little bit. It's just a nice visual of getting that extension, I think, which is very, very important.
There is certainly something to be said for, and some people have a really nice way of doing it, of getting the bottom leg to tuck. But it's not strictly necessary, but it is also a way to achieve that. The second leg carrying upwards will give you a little bit more elevation and a bit more hang time, and we do that with all the front leg jumping kicks. But with the turn, often the back foot going the opposite way is the break that straightens the legs out. And so, I think there's something to be said for both of those as approaches.
Yeah. And what you kind of said there as well was very important, the whole idea of not over-rotating, because as you said, it's an attacking kick, so you don't want to over-rotate, and that's what a lot of people do. They kind of, without the jump, they over-rotate the kick slightly, and they're trying to take it from there, which is just almost like a side kick. You still have to almost get your back facing the target and kicking this way. And I think, as you said, people slightly over-rotate it sometimes.
For sure. So correct positioning for the standing leg in the carry side kick. So for me, this is a little bit easier. But you're going to have to be somewhere between like 150 and 180 degrees behind. Richie's going to show us there, I think. But you need to have the leg pointing, the standing foot pointing behind. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to push off for multiple carries.
And this is back to what we spoke about on your own body as well, I think, Adrian, in the special technique question. It's like, for me, my natural carry is this way. So it's kind of between, if we're talking about a clock, and depending on what you have, it's kind of between the 4 and 5 on a clock, and between the 7 and the 8, depending on the other leg. So it really does depend. Some people can get full rotation to 6. It does depend on your body type and your flexibility. For me, on kick, one of the most important things is to keep your body weight with you. So sometimes people make big, massive steps, and it's a big task to carry your body weight forward. I like to take small, short, quick steps on the standing foot. So as you're going, it just gives you so much more speed to attack with it. Okay, and then one of the other things as well is people try to kick on every single hop. There's no need to kick on everyone. So when I do this, I try to kick, unless there's a reason for it, I try to kick at the target. I'm not trying to kick every time. There's 2 reasons for this. Number one, most people turn it into a yop dulya chagi, which is very easy to counter. Okay, and the second reason is it's a waste. If you're trying to kick, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, and your partner's just going to avoid. So I do this at a little bit of an angle. So what I like to do is just place the end of my foot at the target and just carry it. And I'm always there ready, and when I need to, I can just shoot and extend from there.
Yeah, and I mean, there's something we did in an interview with Dominic Holbing going back last year, and he did a bit of study it was Wacko kickboxing, but he was looking specifically at that technique and how effective people were. Had an awful lot to do with how high they could get their knee on that first lift. And what that does is it meant the lift of the knee was pulling you forward. It was adding some of the momentum going forwards, and the back foot was just really hopping to catch up. So the position that your body forms is a little bit different. So really focus not just on the pivot. That's going to happen naturally if you get that knee high enough. So really focus on getting your front knee up, and that will get you off the mark. I think that's kind of the key thing there.
And we talk about the posture as well. Like obviously it goes with what we spoke about. The more you lean, the harder it is to carry your weight forward and adjust. Whereas if you can keep that posture solid, it's much easier to carry forward.
Cool. So looking at how to practice punching and defending against punches. So this one, we're probably not going to give you a practical demonstration, but a very, very quick chat on it. And myself and Richie bounced all of these questions over and back off each other earlier, and just to make sure we were either having different ideas that were all useful, or that we shared the ideas. And this one of the most important things you can do is get into that particular range. And maybe if you need to take away the legs for a while to get comfortable in that range, do that. That's the place to start. However, the issue that we have in ITF Taekwondo is you don't usually arrive from the same position as boxers do, because we have the legs. So we're usually carrying the leg into the hands, launching past the leg with a blitz or a rush, or we're connecting to the hands, because we're countering a kick. So because of all of those situations, there's almost always momentum and forward or movement involved in our punching. And I think that's what makes it difficult for people to practice, for example, defending against the punches, because you're not standing in a balanced stance, with a good guard and nice head movement when the punches come in.
It's this type of stance, isn't it? And that's what you do. All people say, okay, I want to improve my boxing, and then they switch back to their stance in ITF, and they're like, oh, this doesn't work. So you need to be able to adjust between that stance, of course. And so it doesn't make sense for you to do all the traditional boxing training, because that's not how we carry our body and hold our body position, hold our stance, etc. So it's very important that you can adjust for ITF specifically. That's very, very important. It's not where you're just going gung-ho on boxing. Boxing is not the sport we're doing. Of course, we're taking bits and pieces from it, and we can. But it's like MMA. It's not specific boxing for MMA. It's MMA striking, and it's the same thing for us. We can't just completely take from one sport and just apply it into us in ITF. We need to try to manipulate it slightly and adjust, and that's very, very important on the hands. I think one thing that I would like to see a little bit more on the hands is a little bit more head movement. And we covered this with Adam Shelley there recently on one of our Fight Chat Friday episodes, somebody who's really, really good at staying in the pocket and being with that head movement. And I think it's something that we can kind of get a bit better with in ITF.
Yeah, for sure. And again, just in case anyone's a little bit confused now, we're not trying to put down boxing as a system or as a style at all.
Yeah.
This is very much just saying that the reason that things work in boxing is because of the entirety of the system. It all makes sense in its context. So we have to take the principles from that work and apply it in our context. But I think going back, and our first principle is a lot of people are very uncomfortable with hands initially because they tend to happen with momentum. So you don't tend to stand in front of the person at hand's distance, exchange a few jabs and find your range and get into it that way. We can't feel our way into hands. We get thrown into hands head first. It's deep water. So for us, for me in particular, you have to get people used to the contact a little bit first, let them relax, keep the eyes open a little bit, and then you need to get them on the front foot a little bit in terms of the hands, so following their own legs into hands, before then saying, for example, okay, I need you to counter XYZ, but only with hands. So they're having to make brave decisions to engage, and then it comes together. But it is steps and stages, because for most people, if you've got that nice long tool, the front leg, you want to use that first. You feel nice and safe with your head a long way from your opponent. Getting into the messy but highly lucrative place of punching the other person and getting punched back, is a little daunting, but it is definitely the higher risk and much higher reward place to be.
And as well in the punching style for ITF, most of the time the referees are going to be separating that after a little bit of an exchange. So once you do get comfortable with that, as Adrian was saying, it's very useful to be able to link up some nice exits with that, whether it's exiting with a kick, exiting with some angles and steps. So it's how you get out of that range is just as important as how you get into that range and get comfortable with it as well. So I would definitely start to, as Adrian said, break it down. First work hack, and you start to add bits and pieces as you progress forward. So constraining back what you can do, can't do, and then add it back in. The adding back in part is the most important. So eventually it becomes part of the actual your sparring game. It looks exactly as it would in a real life spar.
Okay, so I'll let you start on this one, Richie, as you're chatting, as it is your biggest challenge in your Taekwondo journey thus far. You're not finished your journey. We've still got more.
Yeah, that's it. It's an interesting question. It kind of got me thinking a little bit. There's no real major challenges for me. Obviously, you go through good times and bad times, but I think for me, there's been a couple of things that I kind of thought of this question in a variety of ways. The first thing that I was thinking of is kind of what this Q&A so far has been that there's so many facets in Taekwondo, especially ITF Taekwondo, that we want to be sharp in and want to be good in. It's very difficult to get that balance and to be able to be outside the self-defense. You're talking about special technique, breaking, technical movements, sparring. There's so much involved in our sport and our martial arts. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. It's not really like a personal challenge as such, but it's certainly a challenge.
Yeah.
That we do have with Taekwondo. From a personal point of view, I think the biggest challenge was almost sometimes defeating myself. A lot of times I competed and I almost didn't lose to my opponent. Essentially, it was you're beating yourself beforehand. So maybe not having the correct mental preparation and things like that is very important. And sometimes those challenges are very tough to be able to come back from. But that's the most important thing, is coming back from those challenges. And maybe if you go and you lose in the first round, how you react and come back and get back to work after that and things like that. So, of course, any journey is going to have its ups and downs. That's what makes it a journey. And it's not plain. And if you do have any kind of bumps in the road, that you don't take it too personal, and you get back on the horse and you get back to work again.
Yeah, that's a super answer. For me, I kind of thought of it in 2 ways. Like the first one is very simple, which was that, for me, when I was 15 and I'd been training about 6 years, my instructor moved away. We had another instructor step in and took over the club, and just with a different ethos. So I missed out on probably 6 years from there, or 5 years anyway, of competitive Taekwondo. And like that was my bread and butter. That was what I was into. And when that went away and we weren't going to tournaments, we weren't like meeting and engaging. Actually, it was a lot like COVID, but in person. So, there was no reason we couldn't meet up and train and compete with other people. We just didn't. And so for me, like that was absolute hell. And I was almost gone from Taekwondo because of that. And it was only because that instructor left and I had this club kind of thrown at me that it actually started to go back. And from there, doors opened left, right, and center, and the world became a better place. But I think because of that, then the challenges I've had is definitely around the worldview. And like I find that a lot of people have a very narrow view of what they want their Taekwondo to be, or what they want a club to be, or what they think Taekwondo can be in general. And I just always want people to think bigger. And, it's a very, very difficult thing to convince people to think bigger unless it also just directly benefits them personally right now, today. So for me, I think that big thinking and picturing ourselves as something more than, what we currently see as Taekwondo, because I can promise you that Taekwondo, like for some people on this chat, you're not training 30 plus years. I can promise you that the Taekwondo that I started, it doesn't hold a candle to what we have now around the world. But I'd like it to be in 30 years time that what we have now doesn't hold a candle to what Taekwondo in 30 years looks like. And so it's just that people can't necessarily picture it. So for me, I want people to see that bigger picture and aim for it, I suppose.
And that's kind of one of the purposes of this channel, really, isn't it? It's what we're trying to do. We're trying to push things forward for people by speeding up the process. That's what a coach or instructor is. Eventually you'll figure things out on your own, but the purpose of a coach or instructor or a teacher is they've been there, they've done that, and they're trying to guide you along the way to speed up the process so you don't make the same mistakes. So like no matter what you're doing, if you look at it back and forward 10 years, back 10 years, you should see a difference in the development of it. And I think that's been massive, particularly in our own country. Myself and Adrian here are both from Ireland, and the Adrian came before me, and he's put in a lot of the groundwork for what we kind of had as an Irish team going away in plastic, but we weren't there all the time, and then pushing forward for the people who are coming through now. And I think that that's one of the most important things of this whole journey.
Absolutely. So our next question is it more important to train speed, or how important is power when it comes to our powerful kicks in Taekwondo? And I suppose this question really depends on, are we talking about sparring or generally? Because it's for what you use them for, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, like, when you're looking, it's very simple. Are you trying to do power breaking? Are you trying to do it for patterns? Are you trying to do it for general self-defense? It depends. And when we look at it from a sport perspective, I think that power is something that we necessarily need in terms of raw, true power. We're not looking for knockouts here in the sport and things like that. And when you look at it, though, speed is very much a byproduct of power in terms of your things like that. So of course but I think to train speed and focus on being explosive is a much better way in terms of looking for just pure out and out power. I think if you compare Muay Thai to ITF, I think that's a good example where they're extremely explosive and very good as athletes, but they're very much powerful type of combat, as opposed to we're looking for more speed and athleticism in ITF, and more kind of like explosive speed in more trying to in a context of scoring points, where these guys are looking for knockouts and damage. So I think that's a good contrast to be able to understand this principle.
Yeah, and I think just to put it in very Taekwondo terms, like if we look at what we do in our patterns, we sacrifice the overall speed of the movement, as in how quickly we get from A to B, in order to arrive with maximum force at the end of the movement. That's the concept. Whereas in sparring, we're willing to not arrive with maximum force in order to get there more efficiently or more quickly. So we can cut the lines, make the angles tighter, and manipulate distance and so on to make sure that we get that touch, or that, that contact that's going to get us a score. But of course, we also need to be able to control the distance between ourselves and our opponent. And some of that is hitting them hard enough that they don't want to come that much closer. So, there's an element of that too. So
definitely.
I think that's a reasonable answer to that one. Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, guys, we're coming towards the end of the questions that we had sent in previously. So if you're looking to get some questions in now in the chat, it might be a good time to get your questions in, and we've tackled some of the live questions soon enough.
Definitely. But a very straightforward question here: options for countering a side kick in sparring. So do you want to go one for one and have a look at some options?
Yeah, do you want to talk about contrast first?
Yeah, okay. So I suppose the quickest way to do this is to, we have a general principle when it comes to counterattacks that holds true most of the time, which is you generally want to contrast with what your opponent is feeding you. So if they're going high, we want to counter low. If they're throwing a straight shot, we want to go around. If they're throwing a short technique, so a short side kick, for example, we can make some space and then counterattack. If they're looking to carry over a big distance, we can close the distance and jam the technique. So that gives us a basis for assessing, well, what do we do with a side kick? Because we know, first of all, it's a straight shot, unless it's not a side kick. So it's a straight shot. And then generally speaking, it's going to be at the hip height, but obviously that can vary. So looking at, maybe, Richie, do you want to start with a hip height side kick and we look at some options there? Yeah. Cool. So if we're looking at that shot as something that we need to deal with, so if I'm kicking towards Richie and he's looking to counter, the main things he's thinking are it's a straight shot and it's low. So he will either go around or go over. So we'll give some options.
So yeah, your hook kick, you can come over it with your hands. You can come straight through because it's above the line of the technique. And you can circle it as well, depending on things like that. So that's one example of the contrast. So we're thinking straight lines with side kicks. Everything here is in a straight line. It's not circular. It's not circular. So anything that you want to almost counter it will be coming circular, or if it's middle, it will be coming above it.
Yeah.
Okay. If it's a high kick, then you be coming under it, directly to the body. So that's pretty much the premise of that, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about breaking the line as well. So because it's coming in that straight line, we can break that line, and that gives us other options. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can move off this way. You can come off the line in this fashion. There's lots of options there. It's basically about doing the opposite. And you can be so creative with these ideas as well. And one of the other things that I really like when you're looking at the rhythm of it, and when are the good opportunities to go. And for this to happen, you have to have your own rhythm. So you have to be proactive on your own side. If you need to be proactive on your footwork, setting a rhythm on your own side if you want to pick the right moment to counter. And what are some of those good moments? Number one is as the kick is lifting up. So as it's about coming here, the minute that toe lifts off the ground, that's a good opportunity to come in. When the leg is up, this is a bad time to go. When the kick is at full extension and it's almost, you're at the end of the kick. That's what we talk about. If you're at the end of the kick, it's not the best time to go. So it's either when it's on the way up or when it's on the way down. These are two good moments to do it. If it's not a side kick per se, it's more of like that flicky turning kick, then you can do it between kicks if you can find the right moment. A little bit more of a higher level skill. So you're looking predominantly on the rise of the kick, on the descent of the kick. But to do that, you need to have your own rhythm and your own footwork set that you can be able to go at when is the correct moment for you to go. And usually that would be like with counting with the hands more so.
Cool. So we would definitely say to people, just start with that principle in mind of contrast. Okay, so to counter, contrast. Directly going head to head with counters, there are some instances where it's a good idea. But if you start off the general principle that if you're contrasting the technique that's coming at you, you're more likely to achieve success. So straight shots go round shots go straight through. Short ones make distance, long ones close distance, high go low, low go high, that kind of thing. And if you start with that as the underlying principle, now you just have to find what the right shot is to blend with that other technique. And it might take a little footwork, it might take a little jump, it might take a little bit of push, but that is the general principle to start with, regardless of what the technique would be. So best way to get the legs feeling more loose, and I presume this is for not as a general thing, but maybe specifically for performance, competition, grading, something like that. And the first thing that jumped to my mind is make sure you have a warm-up routine for the event. Go through that whole warm-up routine, and if you've practiced it, and you should probably get towards practicing it, my preference is hitting. So if you have an opponent who can hold pads on the body for you, or who can just hold flippers, mitts, pads for you, so that you can hit and get a bit of this, like the energy out of the legs, that's generally speaking quite good. Richie, you were talking about kicking it out.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's just action. Like action is the answer to the question. It's like kicking it out, whether you're hitting out turning kicks and you're hitting out. It's just getting the body firing, preparing to get motoring, to get going. When I was thinking about this question, it was like anytime I compete in patterns or I'm looking to do like a grading or whatever, it's like it's a little bit different. You feel a little bit more tense in the legs when it's a sparring competition. But it's the same thing. When I go to compete in patterns, I'm kicking and I'm taking action because my legs are loose, because I'm preparing my kicks. You don't just walk out onto the mat and just throw a kick fresh off the bat. It's the same thing, and that's where it comes in sparring. A lot of time, we just need to get loose by action. So just by kicking, maybe it is like just like more traditional kick that just gets the legs a little bit loose before you get into your actual specific stuff for sparring. It's finding that correct way for you, but basically the answer to the question for me, from my point of view, is action. All right, and getting the legs moving, getting the body moving.
Sweet. So what is for you the single most effective technique in sparring? So yeah, this is tricky because, you know, if you Richie posted the question there during the week of if you only had one technique to take to a competition, which would you choose? And my answer to this one, you know, very simply, and I go back to Bob, is if I could only take one technique into competition, of course, it's going to be the side kick of some description. Mm-hmm. However, the caveat is I won't score very much. I'm going to be very easy to manipulate. I'm not going to score very much. So for me, the side kick is my choice, but I know I'm middle of the pack when it comes to that, because once you give yourself that one option, it's pretty rough, particularly with side kick, because it's a simple kick. It doesn't give you as much. Well, there's a lot you can do with it and you can be pretty effective with it. But for me, I would feel I wouldn't score an awful lot with my side kick.
Yeah, it's like the purpose of the question really is for it to be that kind of a tricky answer. There's no straightforward answer. And that was the purpose of the question. But in terms of the side kick, it's a great option because it allows you to manipulate distance more. You can manage the distance. You can have a little bit more control, I feel. You can attack with it, defend with it quite efficient, a direct hand, so direct front hand, a direct reverse punch. But again, like if you're going through a whole round with this, no matter what the technique is, it's not going to be good enough, really. But in terms of just answering the question specifically, the single most effective technique, is that like the one that scores most often? I guess so. And for me, it's probably a direct front hand is probably the most common shot that is scored in ITF sparring, or maybe a reverse punch. A direct, clear shot with the hands for me will be the answer to that. But I don't think it's like once you get past that initial one, it's kind of like the psychic. If you get it past the initial shot, then you might be in trouble. You know what I mean? And it's very hard to do that attacking and defending as well. So it's just an interesting question, just to get people thinking.
Yeah, and I do think that the underlying one of that, which one gets you the most points, if we play Moneyball with this one, and we say, right, we're going to pick the shots that score the most, and we're only going to train those, you probably do end up with something along the lines of front hand, back leg turning kick, but they don't score necessarily as, here is my shot, I'm going to throw it, I score. And that's how I like to teach psychic. It's like, no, this is everything else, but usually not your scoring shot. It's your range, it's your stopper, it's your carry forward, it's how you get into distance. It sets up all of the other scores, but it doesn't get to take home the glory. So it doesn't play full forward. So that's the kind of thing. It doesn't get the score at the end of the day. No big deal. It's still huge.
Yeah, the technique is only a part of it. It's like if you looked at our top 10 skills video, technique was only one aspect of that. And I did a big post today on Instagram, and I put it on our website as well, about muscle memory, which is kind of tied into the same concept. So go check that out if you have a bit of interest in this type of a topic.
So scrolling across the screen there was one from Gilles. How can we help you? Which is obviously a very, very lovely thing to say when we've put out the question for the Q&A. But we do have a few ideas. And again, this is very, very much in complete and utter appreciation for all the support that people give us as it is. But one of the very first thing is, anywhere that we have a mailing list, if you get engaged with us, you often see it in our blog posts, at the bottom of the Facebook posts, and so on. If you sign up onto our mailing list, it's huge, because that way we can get you guys to suss out future ideas for us. We can do a little bit of market testing and figure out what it is that genuinely helps versus what it is that gets the most likes on Instagram or Facebook or whatever it happens to be. And that's where we want to exist. We want to be in a genuinely helpful space.
Yeah, like everybody has an email, and you're going directly in. It's a news feed, you have to scroll past it. It has to get your attention. You have to engage. With an email, if you're actually genuinely interested in the stuff that we're putting out, it goes direct in the inbox and you can engage. You probably won't open all emails. I don't open all my emails. On for a little bit of time. Email for me will probably last the test of time over all the social media. Bebo has come and gone, MySpace has come and gone, and I'm sure Instagram, Twitter, and all these ones will probably come and go as well at some stage. So I think that if we can build that community around our emails, it will be really good. And we're going to start putting out some weekly emails of the summaries of our best content throughout the week. So it's just a quick buy for people to engage with some ITF Taekwondo content in a good way. If you want to get on the mailing list, it's in the description of this video. So go down to the description. There's a link. Sign up to our email newsletter. Go click on that link, put in your details, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, seriously, it's just, folks, it's about us building the community that's here, because we all learn off of each other. We get great questions, great suggestions. We're trying to learn from the best in our own community and share that as efficiently as we can with everyone. So really and truly, if you're engaged with us in that mailing list, it would really help.
Question as well.
Yeah. So biggest highlight since kicking off TKD Coach Academy, which is now just over 2 years ago. So do you want to
great question, and it kind of gets us thinking, really. But we touched on it earlier. It's been helping so many people around the world. It's almost like that. It's same for me in regular coaching. It's that aha moment when you help somebody and they get that kind of moment of realization. And when you see the comments and just being able to help so many people. I mean, we do this on a Tuesday night just because we enjoy helping people, and we enjoy the questions that come in and being able to help people along their journeys who are in positions where we once were. I was doing a post today, and I actually realized that there's over 50 years experience here between me and Adrian, which is a lot of time. So like, I mean, over 50 years is an incredible amount. If we can share that with other people, we're very, very glad to do so. And I'm glad that we've created this platform as a way for us. It's great for me to almost as like a brain dump as well, to any ideas I have. I just make a little post or I put up some videos, and then our Fight Chat Friday is fantastic because me and Adrian are bouncing ideas off each other. So I think the platform itself has been fantastic, and I'm really proud of what we've achieved with this and where we've come from to help other people. Of course, it's very exciting to be invited to do seminars for people, whether it's in Zoom or whether you get them invited to different parts of the world and things like that. They're really, really exciting too, and it's great to help. But overall, it just comes back to helping people, and that's what we do it for. That's why we're coaches, because we enjoy helping people and being able to push people forward.
Yeah, and honestly, I can't add much to that other than to say, like, for me, coaching was a very quiet conversation in Taekwondo. Everybody kind of held secrets to their chest years ago, you know, and I think it's the one advantage of this very social media oriented age and the internet age is that, you know, the information is all out there if you know how to go and look for it. The problem is, without a community around that information, without the right people, you know, engaging with it, discussing it, sharing, field testing it, coming back with their improvements on it, it's not useful. Like, I can go on YouTube and learn, you know, anything you want about building a house, but I'm not going to start in the morning building a house. I don't have the confidence. I don't have the community around me to know that when I run into trouble, there'll be someone there to dig me out of it. You know, that's not where it's at. So for me, that's the thing. It's about that community part of it, where now we have a conversation happening around Taekwondo, around the different ways you might approach your training, around the coaching. And that's been basically what it was about from the start. So yeah, it's been great.
That's how we got involved. And I have to say, I'm very proud of what we've come up with, and being almost the first people to come out with this, where there's not many people actually weekly having conversations about ITF and putting it out. So it's good to put our sport on the map, because it doesn't get as much limelight as it should. So I have to say, from a personal point of view, I'm very proud of where we've come from, and I want to thank everybody who's supported us throughout that.
Well, that's kind of what this Q&A was about. So again, yeah, huge thank you.
Absolutely.
So tips for strengthening core for taking, oh yeah, I love this one, for taking punches and kicks. Yeah, and if anyone trains with us in our classes, you know that this is just a fun thing that we do on the regular. So yeah, it's huge. So the first thing you need is a very large coconut. So if anyone was brought up watching all the 80s action movies, that's how you do it. You tie the person down, you drop coconuts from a height onto their bellies. This is not how it's done, I think. So like every kind of conditioning, I think you have to start lighter and build things up. But the main thing that we do is we have body contact and head contact with tapping drills. So where it starts with light punching, and if you go way back on our Instagram stuff, you will find some examples of those tapping drill exercises.
Yeah, we have a YouTube video on that as well. How to not avoid punches. So I'm sure if you type that into the search bar, TKD Coach Academy, how to not turn away or avoid from punches, I'm sure you'll come across.
Yeah, we'll find something there. But like the basic concept is put yourself in contact and have expected contacts. So the thing about it is, where we really struggle is where the contacts hit us and we're not expecting it. So when, for example, I'm looking to blitz and my ribs are stretched and there's no tension here and I get a hit, that's awful. If I get solar plexus, that's awful. Whereas if we're kicking and we're all the time expecting the contacts, then, you know, the contacts aren't so bad. So what we're trying to do is we often have things where the contact continues with the hands to the head, but you're not allowed to block anything to the body. So you have to take the turning kicks to the body and so on. And we do that in a relaxed fashion just to get used to it. And it's to kind of get people over that initial part of you won't die. You'll probably be fine.
I don't know about you, Adrian, but like for me, I've competed in ITF sparring for over 20 years. And for me, like I've never been hit with an absolute killer of a shot, at least not enough to count on two hands. You know what I mean? So like that in itself shows people that, like, you know, you're not made of glass. You're not going to break if somebody hits you. Especially in our sport, it's not exactly full contact where people are winding up to try and absolutely smash you. So yeah, I think you'll be okay.
But that's it. But you don't believe it yourself in the beginning. So you have to become conditioned to that over time, is that you will be okay. But first, you know, you have to go through some steps and stages to gain the confidence in that. And the more you do that, actually, it's a lot like, you know, when you're teaching someone to tackle in rugby. The problem is if you shy away from the tackle, you'll end up connecting badly. Whereas when you go into the tackle with full intent, you know, generally speaking, you make a good contact and you're okay. And what happens in Taekwondo is It's when you half blitz and you pull out of it. It's when you half throw a shot, or that's when you get into trouble, is because you put yourself on exactly the range the other person needs. Whereas most of the contacts in Taekwondo should happen at imperfect distances. So the side kick should be hitting here. The back kick should be kind of tucked here a little bit. And because of all of that, what usually happens is you get it before it reaches its maximum speed, and before its maximum speed, you can absorb that impact, and that's what we're trying to do. So, Richie, that takes us to the end of our prepped questions. So, do we want to have a look at just a few of the ones that sneaked in here?
Great, let's get through them.
Yeah, thanks, folks, for putting them in. So, just a few little ones.
If you've been here since the start, get it in the chat box. Let us know if you're here since the start, and we'll answer your question first. Who's going to be first in the queue?
So just really, really nice. We've got Argentinians, we've got Peruvians, we've got some Irish people as well, which is great.
Fantastic.
But as a question here, so when you're sparring, you do a 360 kick, but the opponent, we won't go so far as enemy, goes in front of you when you're in the middle of the kick, so you're blocked by the enemy. What can you do to escape? So maybe we take that one back to the issue. So for any spinning kick, and particularly for a 360 turning kick, for example, we need to have created some movement from our opponent first. We need to get them moving away from us and throw while they're still in movement. If they're able to step through, any round shot is countered by the straight shot, like we were talking about with our contrast. So if I'm throwing my 360, it doesn't matter if it's a 360, a bandidolio tagi, a back kick, a turning kick. All of them are round shots, and your opponent can step through you to cause that problem. And once they're in contact with your hip, you're going over. So the solution to the problem is make sure you pick the right moment to throw the 360 while your opponent is maybe on the way backwards. Because
set up some movement first, isn't it?
Yeah. Get them moving, get them responding to your movement. And in particular, make them be brave. So, if you've got them with one foot outside of the ring and you begin that spin and it's nice and controlled, so, it's not very obvious, like a 360 could also look like, it could have a very wide swing and it makes it very clear. But if my 360 is tight, it's much more difficult to know it's not a back kick or a reverse turning kick. So, maybe disguise it a little bit as well. Richie, here we go. Rowdy Reb, actually, not Rob. So hopefully from Cork. Big problem I have is endurance. Get tired really quickly. Not sure how to really fix this. But lets me down in sparring. So Richie, do you want to point out the video to answer that one?
Yeah, so we have a video on this, and I think there's a shout out to the Black Belter podcast as well. There's a great episode with John Mackey on this specific endurance. But to answer your question very quickly, I should say, is you kind of want to get a bit of a base to it in your endurance, so your kind of long stuff. So maybe your longer walks, whatever, longer jogs, whatever. But check out the podcast. John gives some great advice on this. Just a simple answer. And just a very simple way is just more rounds. If you can do 2 this week, you do 3 next week, whatever, just build it up bit by bit. You don't have to go absolutely crazy from the beginning. I think for most people here who are asking questions, maybe like color belts and things, so just build up your rounds. And I think you bit by bit, what seemed to be difficult in 3 rounds will now be easy, and vice versa. For myself, I know that's the case for me when I go back after COVID and I go sparring with some of my older black belt students. I know it's going to be the same case for all of us. We're going to be knackered after 1 round, but you build on it. You build bit by bit, add the rounds, and I think that's the most straightforward, practical answer for anybody who's not very, very serious about their about the science behind it. Just add in more rounds.
On a very, very simplest level as well. When we go to national team, our early sessions, we're looking for quality above the endurance in the initial part of it. So we'll often start with having people changing every round and using 90-second rounds. And then over time, we'll build up the number, the duration of the rounds to going to 150 seconds, so 2.5 minutes. And we'll mess with the recoveries. But in the beginning, 1 round, 1.5 minutes, full recovery, go again, and focus on the quality.
It's any any physical skill, guys, we're talking about your strength, flexibility, endurance, whatever, anything that's as a physical attribute like that, it's about progressive overloading. So you add a little bit more, where it's frequency, volume, more reps, more sets, whatever, but bit by bit, just add in a little bit more, and your body adjusts to that. That's the secret to any physical attribute.
So from Stephen Ince, any tips on practicing breath control and pattern training? And so the big challenge, obviously you have some variation depending on slow, natural, normal motion, fast motion, all the rest of it. Biggest thing I would say to really make it so that you get to the end of the pattern feeling still strong and still having, you should be feeling it, but you shouldn't be completely out of breath, is you're probably over pushing on the exhale. The exhale isn't short enough. So when you get to the end, if you find that you have a where there's a long exhale at the end of each movement, that is going to really sap you over 36, 40, 50, 60 movements, whatever your patterns happen to be. So if you're up to 68 and 72 movements, that's going to kill you. If it's just one yo or something in 28 movements, you'll probably be fine. But that very sharp breath and that inhale. Also, if it's all in the chest, it's very hard. Try to make sure you keep a little bit of core tension, belly breathe a little bit more, and that will really help you. So take your time at the end of each stance, particularly if you're doing it in the count, just to make sure that you're not sucking air into your chest, but sucking air into the belly, and it'll help keep control.
Also, I think relaxing between the movements as well is very important. Take away the breath control. Just like coming neutral between the techniques. So just keeping your hands neutral between the techniques, and then start your backward motion and move on to the next one. Gives you that half a second to just go between the techniques.
Yeah, really, really important. I think we've covered Jordi's question here in terms of how to counter the side kick efficiently. So we'll go back to the contrast and blending. Another one then from Rowdy Reb. Can you throw hooks and uppercuts in ITF? I've been told only straight punches, but I do see some sparring where they're throwing hooks. I suppose we need to justify that within our ITF. If the logo looks like Richie's chest there, yes, hooks and uppercuts. Just make sure that they are controlled to the target. So we can, the difference is if I hook through, the same as if I go with a straight punch, it actually doesn't matter. But I can use any hand technique that lands with we have for international competition, a white section on the glove. But
got one over here.
Yeah, I was just looking to my side here. Do I have one handy? But yeah, there is a white section on the glove. If it lands with that section of the glove and it's a legal technique, then we're all good to go.
I lied.
You lied. Okay, yeah, but there is, you'll be used to seeing it. There's just a white section on the above the knuckles. You want to land with that, so we can't hit with the wrist, the palm heel, etc.
Basically, one of the reasons that we don't see a lot of it, guys, is because we don't spend a lot of time in that close range like they do in kickboxing and other sports. It's for us, we have long range, mid range, was kind of like a bit of kick, long punches and kicks, and then we have that very close range. But a lot of time that close range will be pulled apart by the referees quite quickly, so we don't have enough of time to spend in the pocket with the uppercuts and the hooks in the very short range, and that's one of the main reasons you don't see it.
Yeah. So questions from Scott Boyd. Any tips for training with sciatica and stretches, etc.? So so a couple of the basics that you absolutely have to have if you're training with sciatica. The simplest and easiest stretch, start with the legs crossed, fold the body forward to the ground, bring your head forward, shift the feet forward and go again, go right and left, this way. So the knees down here, lifting the knee back, just to increase the stretch here. Lining up this way as well, heel in front of your knee, pigeon stretch. So we'll ease back into this one. If that's complicated or hard to start with, what you do is you'd have use a plyometric box or a bench or whatever in front of you, put the foot up on it there and add to the stretch. But basically that position of the foot is what you're going to try and achieve to relieve the kind of strain on the sciatic nerve. Now, again, depending on how severe you're finding it, that would be a good place to start. But the other thing to remember as well is that the stretches will need to be of longer duration and done almost separately from your training. So giving it 30 or 40 seconds before you start training isn't going to be as effective as on your alternate days when you're not training. Giving the stretches a minute to 2 minutes plus on each side and over a prolonged period of time is just going to be so much more effective. From Gavin, is Taekwondo still as popular in Ireland today with the rising fashion of MMA and BJJ?
Yeah, I think it's look. When I was a kid, it was whatever the sport that was on TV. We went and played on the street, and I think, of course, Conor McGregor is going to have a big impact on that for the next generation. But of course, a lot of them will join martial arts as a whole. To answer the question specifically, I think that Taekwondo will always be very, very big for children in particular, and getting them in at a young age and building them up.
Yeah.
For adults, I know that we have actually a lot of adults here who joined as adults, tuned into this chat. But I think that BJJ in particular is one that kind of is very good for the long-term athlete. A lot of people do BJJ to come into MMA, but then BJJ itself is a great one for long-term, because you have, one of the reasons is it's kind of like our own divisions, I guess. You have the masters divisions, the 30 and over. You have divisions for everybody, and it's just one of those sports that no matter what age you can still do it and compete. But I think it's the answer is the same for Taekwondo. So it depends on what you can get from it and take out of it. I think Taekwondo will always be quite popular in Ireland. Of course, there's MMA is rising now, but I'm sure, Adrian, when back in the 80s, it was the same for Taekwondo. It was on the rise, I guess, wasn't it? That's how it goes. Peaks and valleys.
Exactly. I suppose everybody knew karate back then. Before that, it was judo. That's just kind of the way it goes. But right now it's very hard to say, but would say prior to COVID, it was in a very healthy place, probably just over 300 Taekwondo clubs in the country. So, doing quite well. So yeah, I think still holding strong. Yeah. So let's see.
If we missed your question, send it in again, maybe, because it'll pop up at the most recent.
Just Gavin saying he's looking forward to his return to training. He kind of feels like with his own training and adding on the bit of supplementary stuff with us, he'll be in a better shape when he gets back to his own training. Brilliant. So that's nice to hear, Gav. Brendan's rolling in with him. And then from Magda, how does the style of fighting change with age? Just curious, when observing young students and adults, is there more planning and judging the situation? Yeah, it's a different sport, isn't it?
Yeah, young kids are just they're flat out. Once you say "see Jack," they're gone. The kitchen sink. I'm going to take that comment back, because I've seen some adults that are absolutely vicious in there as well. Like the older adults, I mean. So the guys in the masters divisions and things like that. So yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think with age, we just become a little bit more thoughtful of the process, and I guess there's a little bit more fear involved with people, and more calculated risk the older you get, and that goes with everything in life, isn't it?
But I think it's also very important that you watch, when you think of how you compare yourself, and how, you don't want to watch the 15-year-old black belts to figure out how you should spar. It's not relevant to you. Just, don't pay any attention to them from that point of view. In the same way as I'd often say, if you looked at female sparring compared to male sparring, there are differences. There are things that will work in female sparring that don't work on the male sparring, etc., and vice versa. So you have to kind of look at your age group, your category, your division. If we had yellow belts taking those incredibly detailed feints, like the very subtle things that Richie was showing earlier on, most of the time the other yellow belts isn't even going to react to it. They'll just bounce.
Yeah.
And so it's a waste. Where, if you did a big profound fake, maybe it would work at yellow belt level, but you get to black belts, and it's like, they'll look at you going, well, that's obviously fake. It's not real. So we want to get that way to where if you can watch the people who are at the similar level to you, find out what they're doing, figure out how to compete with that. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah. Nick has a question in there, because he sent it in earlier, and we must have missed it, Nick, about the knee drop.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's something that you need a bit of a training in this, and a bit of a program, but there's lots of exercises you can do for the knee. So it's just simple things I use. I place a beanbag on the knee. You can kick through hoops. It's just, what can you do to constrain, to make your knee go through? So a lot of people, they kick with that knee kick off. So you want to be able to pull the knee up first, and there's a lot of training you can do with that. So it's trying to find ways that you can almost, not, I don't want to say force, but ways that you can make the kick work in that position for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's always,
of course, it's very much connected to flexibility and things like that as well. But this is active flexibility training, so this is stuff Adrian is showing you right here on the screen, kicking above a chair. This is
your best friend.
Static, active stuff.
Yeah. But like as Richie says, if you can find the limiter and the mechanics, then away you go. But it's generally like you need to have a look at the technique in person to see if there's something obvious. But generally speaking, you can give yourself something like a chair to kick over, and it will automatically correct everything for you.
Shout out to the veterans.
Yeah, exactly. They're really keeping it going in the chat there. So a very simple one. Can I get my belt rank recognized if I go to another country and train there? Generally within ITF, yeah, that's no problem. Particularly, I've certainly had students traveling and instructors from other countries will look for their certificate, and we can, send that out. That's not a problem. And I'm sure it's exactly the same. Certainly, if you're a black belt within the ITF, you'll have a degree number, a card, a certificate, and all of that travels the world over, thankfully. So we're good there. Can we make warm-up exercises, videos and routines before starting training? We have a few of those up there. We could certainly be doing more in time, but we have a few up there in the channel. Then
we want to get to a stage eventually where you search anything you want around Taekwondo, type in TKD Coach Academy, and it should pop up on YouTube somewhere. We've over almost 200 videos on the YouTube channel.
That'll be a milestone. We'll get that in the next week or two.
Yeah.
So there you go. So that does bring us to the end of those questions and the end of this little celebration. So it's been really, really nice kind of putting a bit of a pointer on 2 years of this journey. And we don't plan on stopping anytime soon. So hopefully people keep enjoying what we're up to.
Yeah. We have any tips on the front leg axe kick? We did a video there. Go check out our axe kick video from, I want to say 2 or 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday.
3 weeks ago, yeah.
Yeah, and I did a short clip on that as well. So if you go through our last videos, there's a short clip of me going through it as well of that specific type of axe kick. As I said, we've got videos on everything.
Yeah, exactly. Gavin, no short answer to your question there. Is there an isolated specific self-defense syllabus such as such in ITF? So each country in some cases has developed an ITF or a self-defense syllabus. New Zealand worked with a personal defense instructor to develop a syllabus and specific things for each grade. And other countries have done similar things. We haven't got something exactly like that in Ireland at the moment, although we have guidelines and things and what we would consider to be, principles behind the self-defense. But the general didn't limit it to, well, this is the self-defense per grade. We're delighted he didn't at the moment, but yeah, no, that didn't happen. So there are just examples in the book and ideas in the book of how you might use the techniques for self-defense.
Yeah, fantastic. Guys, thanks very much for tuning in. We still have plenty of people here tuned in with us after almost, over an hour into this anyway. So thanks very much, guys. We really appreciate it. We enjoyed answering your questions. As always, catch you in the next one. We've got some exciting guests lined up for the next few Fridays. Again, we'll be back next Tuesday. It looks like the restrictions aren't easing anytime soon here. So we'll probably be back again for the next couple of Tuesdays with some sessions. Any suggestions, let us know. Anything that you want us to cover in a practical session, just drop us a message on any social media. Don't forget to get your email into our list. So in the description box, up the top of the link. Always, see you in the next one.
Bye, folks.